Hi, everyone. Just a quick anecdote. So Mr. Cowan here was completely accurate in his story because I'm the one who called him about the crazy Ukrainian at the border. I was sitting up at the Sky Bar in this hotel, and all of a sudden I got a message on LinkedIn, and I'll do the accent, Gordon, I have problem. And I was like, oh boy, here we go. So I said, okay, I have no pull in Gibraltar yet. Who do I reach out to? I'm like, okay, Nickland's very important. Let me try this. And it was amazing. So I think within half an hour, you got multiple Ukrainians across the border. And I think we're going to use that in our next transaction with maybe slightly different purpose, but you're a great guy, so I want to thank you for that. You really jumped all over. And I think that epitomizes what I'm learning about Gibraltar. You know, it's small enough to move fast. And we had a great breakfast this morning, and you explained where you guys are going with this whole project. It's really impressive, so thank you. Okay, let me shift over here. So I'm going to give one of those legal talks, and it's one of those things where you have to sort of lead up to it and provide context before it all makes sense. So it's going to be a little bit of a meandering path. But who's just doing a pulse check? Who's familiar with the term SAFT? Just raise your arm. Okay. Who's issued or used a SAFT? Okay. Who's signed a SAFT? Interesting. Okay. So here's some acronyms I'm going to use. SA33 is, and by the way, SAFT is sort of informed by United States law, but it has a global consequence. So let's look at it from that lens. So SA33, I'll say, is the U.S. Securities Act of 33, which is the foundation of all American securities law. That's the one place you go, and everything else gets built on top of that. SEA 34 is the U.S. Securities Exchange Act of 34. SEC, the Darth Vader of international securities law. And SAFT is simple agreement for future tokens. And we have a little resolution issue here, but the way, just to lend some context, SAFTs apply when you're issuing tokens from the venture or from the project to the first buyer. It does not have to do with secondary market. So I will dive in here. Here's a friendly disclaimer. I'm a lawyer, but I'm not your lawyer. That's it. Okay. Well, this is displaying an interesting way. Let's try this here. All right, this is a wall of text. Here's the idea. Imagine you have a entrepreneurial Gibraltarian, is that the term? Startup. And they have a worldwide vision. And in order to realize their vision, they want to issue their tokens through the world, either to worldwide investors or to worldwide consumers. They can't realistically avoid the United States if they want to do that, because for the moment, we're still the largest economy, and China's locked down ICOs for the moment. And whether you want to have Americans as customers or whether you want to take advantage of American investment, somehow, some way, you want your tokens to end up in the United States or be bought by United States parties. But our brave Gibraltarian startup is concerned about issuing tokens into the United States, whether they're utility or securities or whatever, because we had the SEC, U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, and we have the United States securities laws. And those are a big confusing mess to a lot of people, and they don't know how to work with it. And there's some basis for being concerned, because the default rules for issuing securities in the United States or issuing something that may be securities are onerous. And if the SEC thinks you're committing fraud, intentionally or not, or going public by mistake, there can be consequences. I had a beautiful flowchart here, so I want you to sort of do like a little kabuki theater with me here. And, okay. And by the way, you're all welcome to email me, and I will send out a copy of this PowerPoint, and you'll see it in real life. Okay, so here's a top-level approach to issuing tokens from a legal perspective. You have a startup that has an idea, and they need funding. In order to make their project real, they want to issue tokens in order to raise funds. There's a question right there, which is, are these tokens going to be sold into the United States? Now, just so everyone's clear, for American securities laws to apply, the tokens don't actually have to be sold into the United States. These are not the droids you're looking for. Okay, there you go. They don't actually need to be sold in the United States. They can merely be offered for sale. So if you're advertising something on the internet, and Americans can see it, it's being offered for sale into the United States. And I'm also going to be distinguishing between issuing tokens, which, like I mentioned, is the first sale to the initial purchasers, and distinguishing that from trading on the secondary markets or on exchanges, or mining, for example. Okay, so you have a startup that needs funding. It wants to sell tokens in order to raise those funds. And the question is, are those tokens being sold into the United States or offered to sell into the United States? Now, if you're not selling to the United States, you theoretically have no problem, but you're limiting your market. You're limiting your potential investor in your startup, and you're potentially limiting your customer base. And if you're in a competitive situation, that can be bad news. If you are selling to the United States, the next question I want to ask is that a security under Howey? Now we're going to have another question. Who's heard of Howey? Everyone's heard of Howey. So there's a test in the United States, which is whether or not something that doesn't fit a regular classification as a security is nonetheless a security, and that's the Howey test. I'll go over that in a second. So is the token being issued a security under Howey? Yes. That means you need to register it or find an exemption. Or no. And what this says is, even if it's not a security, you need to be aware that now you're issuing a product, a good, or a service, so there's potentially tax implications to reselling these tokens. Okay, again, this is a wall of text, but the idea is the core legislation in the United States that governs all securities sales is the Securities Act of 1933. And the default rule under the 33 Act is that if you're issuing securities into the United States or offering to sell them into the United States, that you need to register those securities with the SEC unless there's an exemption. That's the default rule. That's why everyone's concerned. Because if you're selling tokens and those tokens are deemed to be securities and they're going into the United States, the default rule is that you need to register those securities. And registration, of course, is quite complex and expensive. And the way you get around it, if you look at the very bottom of the screen, is by finding an applicable exemption. Okay, here. So promoters, again, a wall of text here, but promoters of businesses or startups or projects can be very inventive. And if they want to get around the securities laws, they can come up with clever names and not call something a stock or a bond or a debenture. They can call it something random like a token. And then the question is that token really underneath it all, underneath the sheets, a security? Well, in both the 33 Act and the 34 Act, there's this concept of an investment contract. That's a catch-all concept. So if something's not labeled a stock or a bond, but it's deemed to be an investment contract, under US law, it's found to be a security. That term of investment contract is not defined in the Act. So the one case that started all the interpretation of what that means is SEC versus Howey. And that came out in 1946. It was a Supreme Court case and promulgated what's known as the Howey test. So when you look at a token, or when you look at anything that doesn't have a name of a regular security, and you're trying to decide whether or not it really is a security in the United States, you apply that Howey test. And there's 4 elements of the Howey test, and each of these needs to be true in order for it to be a security. So it's and. You have an investment of money, and money can be services or even sometimes a donation. And what's called a common enterprise, with a reasonable expectation of profit, that's going to be derived from the efforts of others, not yourself, but from others. If each one of those things is true, and you're issuing a token in the United States, then that token will be deemed to be a security. And again, the default rule is that you either need to register it, or you need to find an applicable exemption. This all kind of reconfigured here. Oops. And let me lay out a general concept here. The SEC is not anti-issuing securities, and they carved out valid exemptions to the registration requirement. The gist of those exceptions or exemptions is that you're not going public. You're selling your securities, you're selling your tokens to a select group of investors who are wise enough, wealthy enough, or well advised enough that they don't require the SEC to protect them from their own bad judgment or their own mistakes. So that's the basis of exemptions from the registration requirement. Okay, now we're kind of getting to the meat of the SAFs. So everyone in the world agrees that if you're issuing tokens that are designed to be securities from the beginning to the end, and you're selling them into the United States, that you need to either register those securities with the SEC or find a valid exemption under Howey. So just taking this chain, the startup wants to get some funding. It wants to issue tokens to raise those funds. Those tokens are being sold into the US or offered for sale into the United States. Those tokens are securities under Howey. For example, they can pay a dividend. If that's the case, you need to register with the SEC or find an exemption. And now I'm going to slow down because here's the meat of the SAF. Again, if you sell a security token, you must register it or find an exemption. Here's where things get tricky. Suppose you have an idea that you want to get going. You want to issue issue tokens to raise funds to make that project happen. You're selling those tokens into the United States. Those tokens are not securities under Howey. They're just plain utility tokens. Here's the rub. If you're selling utility tokens into the United States before you have a functional use for them, before there's a network that can receive them, if you're building something that's going to be available maybe 2 years out, the Cooley law firm and several other people agree with them, assert that those tokens are securities until they can be used in a functional network. I'm going to say this again because this is where I've seen huge firms in the United States make this mistake and not get this. All right. Just one more time to make it super clear. If you're selling tokens that everyone agrees will eventually be utility tokens that are not going to be securities, you're not paying dividends, they don't represent an equity interest, but you're issuing those tokens before they're usable, Cooley and many other firms assert, and many regulators agree with them, that during that period, these tokens are securities. So if you sell them and you don't register them with the SEC, you're breaking that law and you're going public by mistake, which can have consequences. So Cooley and the rest assert that if you're selling tokens before they're usable, you need to either register with the SEC or find an exemption. Now, if you're issuing tokens that are utility tokens and they're immediately usable in a real system, this doesn't apply. You may be selling a good, you may be selling a service, but you're not selling a security. So what Cooley came up with is the SAF. And the SAF is a simple agreement for future tokens. Has anyone heard of a SAFE? Simple agreement for future equity? Okay. There is a long history of figuring out how to route angel investment into startups. So once you burn through your friends, family, and fools, you can either give your investors common stock, you can give them preferred stock, that evolved into convertible notes, that converted into SAFEs, it looks like you're familiar with. And Phil Graham from Y Combinator came up with that idea. And then Cooley sort of went onto the marketing bandwagon and decided to call the concept a SAFT. And under a SAFT, this only applies when you're issuing tokens that are going to be utility tokens before they're usable and need to deal with the securities law issue that results. So a SAFT is not issuing tokens. It's an agreement to issue tokens in the future once they're actually usable in real life. And here's where I'm seeing law firms in the US and everywhere else mess up in a big way. Those SAFT agreements are themselves securities. Okay? Those SAFs are securities. So if you're selling SAFs to investors or to buyers, then you either need to register them with the SEC or find an applicable exemption. So when you're issuing SAFs into the United States, you need to find what's usually called a exemption. Usually it's a Reg D exemption. You're selling a certain amount to certain investors, usually referred to as accredited investors, and only once the token is usable in real life do you convert it into the token, but at that point it's a utility token and you're not issuing securities. What I'm seeing a lot of firms do is they're issuing SAFs to everyone, and they're not registering it and they're not restricting who they go to. You want to go here? Craig worked some magic with his pointer. Let's see here. Oh, look at that. Let's see, I think I went one too far. If you want to see a good example of how this was done right, you can look at Filecoin. Filecoin, as of last I checked, hasn't actually issued any tokens. What they've done is they've worked with a firm called Coinlist. Coinlist vetted investors or buyers to see if they were accredited. And Filecoin only accepted investment from those parties. Those parties received SAFs, which were registered, or actually they were exempted under the SEC. And those SAFs will convert at some date in the future, maybe by 2021 is the date I think that's in there, into the utility tokens once the Filecoin network is usable. So if you want a good example of a private placement memorandum, the filings, and how this was all handled, you can look at the Filecoin sales. So how do you deal with all this? What do you do? For this flowchart, assume for the moment we're not overly concerned with the securities laws of countries other than the United States. I know that's a big assumption, potentially dangerous, but let's just assume that for the moment. What I suggest is this is the right way to handle SAFs and also wanting to sell your securities or your utility tokens on a worldwide basis. I suggest that you should have a primary website for your project that is not the one pitching the tokens, but it's explaining why your project is so great and why everyone should get involved with it. I suggest that you should have a secondary website on a different URL that is referencing that you're doing an ICO for the project. That way there's no confusion between the two. When you go to the ICO website, you should do what everyone's doing right now, which is you should look at the IP of the person visiting the website and also ask them explicitly, are you a US citizen? Are you residing in the US? So that there's an affirmative statement from them as to whether they are or aren't. If you have a US, the question then is that person a US buyer? If the answer is no, what I suggest is you should go to a subdomain of the site, maybe called global.projectico.io, and that's for everyone other than US buyers. And you can sell the utility tokens to them directly before those utility tokens are functional. If the answer is yes, they are a US buyer, I suggest that they should be directed to an entirely different subdomain than this one, called usa.projectico.io. And at that site, you should make the same requirements that Filecoin made. You should have a third party validate that the person buying the tokens is an accredited investor and only sell to them. And unfortunately, for better or for worse, turn everyone else away so you don't go public by mistake. Those accredited investors can buy SAFs. Those are securities. They're going to be either registered or this will be an applicable exemption. And then when the network is live, because you use the funds that you receive through your token sale and through your SAF sale, those SAFs will convert into utility tokens and you just escaped US securities law. I know that was a lot. I know it was fast. But those are SAFs. Thank you.